Hi, I'm Phil Crocker and welcome to the fifth in our series looking at how we can play better Blitz. This one will focus on our choice of openings. Just as a recap, in the previous four videos we looked at an introduction, how we set up our system, how and when we can pre-move, and also some practicing basic checkmates, all designed to move as quickly as possible in order to save time. Openings is another area where you can save time. If you know them well, you can play more or less instantly, and some openings you can play the same or very similar moves, more or less independent of what your opponent does. So we'll look at some details around that now. So first decision really is, are you playing Blitz in order to learn an opening? Because doing so can be a very effective way of getting experience in a relatively short period of time. Or, as we're assuming here, if you're using an opening to actually try and win, then if you're trying to win, then it makes sense to stick with the same openings for a little while. Now you can change approach over time. Change your openings over time is quite a good idea to learn new types of positions. But short term, if you play the same opening for over a number of games, then you should start to recognize patterns, learn specific moves, and win more games. So the good news is there are quite a few strategies that you could effectively apply for choice of openings. I mean, pretty much anything you already know quite well, that would work. Another good area is sharp openings. It's harder to defend at very fast speed, so anything that puts pressure on your opponent. Gambits is a related idea. Giving up a pawn is not too big an investment if your opponent has to think that bit harder. Then the final category, systems, so something like a London system where more or less you can play similar moves regardless of what your opponent does. Even things like the hippopotamus where pretty much people do exactly the same moves against anything. Those things can work pretty well at a Blitz. You can play the moves very quickly. You'll probably be familiar with the plans, so it can definitely work well. So just to give a couple of examples of some of those categories. So this is the notorious England Gambit, and black immediately challenges the centre. I wouldn't really recommend it at classical games, although for full disclosure, the one occasion many years ago I did face it, I did lose with white against it, as it was a surprise at the time. In Blitz, it can work very, very well, and if you look at the Lichess database, which we'll do later on, it's actually played in quite a large percentage of games on Lichess and works quite well. Black gives up a pawn, but in return gets active pieces and the possibility of confusing the opponent a little bit, which in practice works pretty well. A suspect opening. So this is the Alekhines defense against the king's pawn. It's quite provocative. You're attacking a pawn. White can push pawns to attack the knight, build up a big center, but then you have easy plans to try and undermine that center. And for white to maintain a space advantage, that's quite difficult at Blitz. So the Alekhine can work quite well as well, and similar openings, counter-attacking openings. Sharp openings. Sicilian addicts may recognise the notorious poison pawn variation of the Najdorf Sicilian here. So positions like this, you could play for either side if you know them very well. In this position, white routinely gives up several pawns for rapid development. Black is looking to counter-attack, and it's quite likely that one side will make severe errors and lose quite quickly. So if you know it a little better than your opponent, then again, that's potentially a very good strategy. And pure system, this is the London system. This sort of piece configuration for white, you can play against more or less anything that black does. I mean, you can play the London system to try and refine your choices, maybe put the pawn on c4 and c3 in some cases, maybe play h3 in some specific positions. Potentially you can develop the bishop on to f4 before you develop the knight to f3. There's all kinds of subtleties you can apply, but it's also possible just to play these kind of moves in more or less any order, and at Blitz you're quite likely to get away with that sort of approach. So, well, quite a lot going on this slide. This is a summary of information that you can get by looking at the Lichess opening Explorer, which we'll actually take a glance at in a couple of minutes. But this is data derived from that, and what you can see in the two tables is a whole series of openings labelled from A to U, so A to M on the left-hand table, N to U on the right-hand table, and we've split it into certain categories. So the standard on the left-hand top corner, the short and somewhat suspect King's Pawn halfway down the left-hand table, short and somewhat suspect Queen's Pawn towards the bottom of the left-hand table, and then then on the right-hand table we've got systems, London system at the top against various black defences, then the King's Indian tack, which is another system, a bit like a King's Indian as the name suggests, and again against different black defensive approaches, and then we've put reversed Leningrad Dutch, which is another. The Dutch is basically another system that you can play. You can play as black. You can also reverse it and play it as white against more or less anything. So the data I'm showing is broadly two categories: the Lichess Master DB, Master Database, and the Lichess Player Database. So Lichess has a database of it's quite a lot of games. It's not as many as, say, a professional tool like Chessbase, Megabase would have, but it's a decent volume of games, and you can look at how that well an opening does in practice. So if we scroll just over halfway down the left-hand table and look at G, the Stafford Gambit, then on the Lichess Master Database, broadly kind of international tournament games and so on, white wins 50% of the time, 38% of games are drawn, and 13% of games are won by black. So the opening doesn't perform very well at an elite, mostly classical level. But if you look at the Lichess Player Database, carrying on to the right of the table, then you'll see it does much better. And effectively, Blitz and Bullet are going to be what makes up the Lichess Player Database. You'll see that white only scores 45%, just 3% draws, and black actually scores 52%. So at classical chess, white normally scores something like 55%, black 45%. So for a black opening to do better than to have a plus score for black is very good. And you can see one row down, the Alekhine's defense is balanced, right? So at Blitz and Bullet, it scores 48% wins for each colour, 4% draws. If you look at the mostly classical master database, then white wins 37%, but black only wins 26%. So some of these, what I'm describing, somewhat tongue-in-cheek as short and somewhat suspect, do pretty well at Blitz and Bullet, right? And you can look through the table at other examples if you're interested. And similarly, if you go onto the right-hand table, the systems, you'll see that they can also do reasonably well. So perhaps because the systems aren't that sharp, the performance isn't as good as some of those left-hand table systems. But if we look towards the bottom, if we look, say, as Hippo as white, then you'll see in classical chess, white wins 67%, so actually does quite well, but I think it's a very small sample there. But at the Lichess Player Database, white wins 49%, black 47%, so it's doing okay, but it's not exceptional. So if you want to refine your openings further, you can, and it's good practice to look at each of the games you play, do a quick review of that, and definitely look at where you would vary your opening in future. And one good tool for looking around that is the Lichess Opening Explorer, which we'll look at now. Okay, so this is the Lichess main screen, and we're going to go into Tools on the top menu, Openings, and you can choose the speed here. We'll just leave it as it is for the moment, bullet to correspondence, but you can vary that. And we'll look at Explorer, and we'll put in a we'll put in a few moves in a second. But first of all, you'll see 3 different tabs on the bottom right hand corner. So there's a Masters. I'm going to click on Masters, and here you'll see E4 is played in 1.1 million games on the Masters database, D4 900,000 games, and so on. So there's a total of 2.5 million games there. And then the other database, Lichess, this has what is that? 4.9. Well, there's a lot of zeros there. It's not 4.9 billion. Certainly, it's a lot of games anyway, right? So a much bigger order of magnitude than the Masters database, which was 2.5 million. So the third area is the player database. So you can set this as your own username, or you could even set it as another player if you were trying to investigate. Just suppose you use, say, Magnus Carlsen's username, you could key that in and you could explore what they play, right? So this is set as me. I've toggled it for the white performance, and if I click on this, I think it will toggle to black. So let's do one quick example. So we'll look at E4, and then we'll see what I played against that. So I played D6, 766 games, E5, 754 games, Knight F6, the Alekhines, 217 games. And you can look at the performance of those openings. So interestingly, the Alekhines opening has scored 71% black wins, only 21% losses for me, whereas the other openings have done decently, but haven't done quite as well. Now, it may be that I'm playing that against slightly weaker opponents, right? So you can actually hover over this. So the performance rating, 1965, average opponent 1773, and if for the Alekhines, if we scroll up, then performance rating is actually a touch higher for playing E5, because I've played it against higher rated opponents on average. So you can look at this kind of analysis, right? So let's just focus on the Knight F6 for the moment. It's scored pretty well for me, and if we go to the Masters database, then let's put that in, E4 Knight F6. So you can see there are 20,221 games on the Masters database, 37% wins for white, 37% draws, 26% wins for black. So it's not fantastic as at a Masters level in most of the classical games. But if you flick onto Lichess database, then you'll see that it's, as we mentioned before, it's 48% white wins, 48% black wins, 4% draw, so it does decently. And then for me, we saw before that in total I've won 71% of those games. So that's the Lichess Opening Explorer. You can put in all manner of moves into it, and it will give you these sort of information. It will also show, if you're on the, say, the Masters database, you can scroll down and it'll show some games. So we can see that Caruana Carlsen reaches Alekhines position, Carlsen Nakamura, and so on. So you can click on those and play through the games. You can also toggle on the engine. So this is a really useful tool for exploring openings. So chess.com has similar functionality. I prefer the Lichess one, but you can go into Learn and then Openings, and you can see popular openings, all openings, various things you can click on here. explore openings. So this is another source. Some things are fairly similar. Depending on your account with chess.com, some of this may be behind a paywall. That's certainly not the case with Lichess, so I think Lichess is really the default option here. So just finishing off on how you can refine your openings, you can look at Chessable courses. A lot of that is to be purchased, but you can also get what's called short and sweet courses. These are abridged versions of longer courses which you get for free as a taster, and you may find that in some cases that the taster is actually is more than sufficient in itself, so that's worth investigating. And then if you're really serious, if you're a professional or aspire to be, then ChessBase is more of a database approach which would be used by pretty much all professionals. So hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Any comments, queries, please post them. If you like the videos, please give them a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you like the topics we covered, then there's also my book Better Chess Faster, which you can find on Amazon, and hopefully see you for the next video.